Welcome to The Walls Within, the mental journey to elite performance. The primary purpose of this podcast is to educate. It is intended for private, non-commercial use, and the views presented by your hosts or guests do not reflect on any agency, company, or organization that they work for. Thanks for joining us today as we share insight into our journeys over, around, and through the walls that lie within our own minds. We're going to talk about what we've learned through years of triumphs and failures. How did we continue on a goal-inspired path without allowing failure and mental fallibility to drive the outcome? More importantly, we hope some of the discussions will allow you to reflect on your own journey and provide you some resources for your own growth towards performance improvement. In today's episode, we're discussing performance under pressure and how stress can impact our overall mental approach to critical tasks in everything we do. We'll also share some insights from medical doctors, researchers, and former U.S. Navy SEAL Jocko Willink. We'll leave you with 6 tips on how to develop integrative awareness during and prior to a crisis. My name is Dave Paolillo. I'm a 19-year U.S. Air Force fighter pilot, and I'm joined today by NHL veteran goaltender and 2-time Stanley Cup champion, Curtis McElhaney. Thanks for joining us for The Walls Within, episode 5. Dave here with Curtis. And we're going to continue where we left off in episode 4, talking about some things that we can do. And in episode 4, if you listened, we talked about visualization. We talked about chair flying. We talked about the pregame routine, and that could be day of event, or that could be weeks prior to the event. But we talked about those things that you can do to sort of train your brain to see success. Well, the other aspect of that, first of all, before I jump in, if you're joining us again for episode 5, I do want to give you all a shout out and say thanks. We've got increased interest. We've got increased listeners and increased hits on our Instagram. And so I appreciate that. Curtis and I really appreciate that. You can find us on The Walls Within on Instagram or thewallswithin.com on the website. And again, keep sharing us and tell your friends and family about the podcast. But jumping in, we talked about visualization, and one of the things that that visualization can do is rehearse your brain for success. The other piece of this, though, is that visualizing more of the smell and feel of an experience can kind of take away some of the stress. And I alluded to that the last time, and it can take away some of that anxiety. Well, there's some other things that are happening that are worth kind of mentioning on the visualization front, but also kind of on the body's physiological response to performance anxiety or to stress or the things that we worry about. And a lot of times we don't even kind of know it's happening. And so Curtis and I were sharing some articles and we're looking at some stuff. And Curtis, we found this article from a Vernon Williams, MD, and there's some things happening in the brain. And I know that you could kind of speak to that. So maybe you could take us through that and kind of talk about what's happening to folks when we're feeling some of this anxiety.
Yeah, I think anytime, you get into what we would deem a stressful situation, whether that be preparing for an event or even during an event, what tends to happen is your emotions almost take over. You get into that flight or fight response and things just kind of seem to consume you. And I think for me personally, one of the hardest things to recognize was that feeling that was going on internally. It's like all of a sudden there was a high risk situation that occurred in a hockey game, and my heart rate would shoot through the roof. For example, let's just say it's a turnover and it ends up in a breakaway, and you're in a 1-0 hockey game and there's 5 minutes left. And the only thing that matters is that you have to make that save in order to preserve that 1-0 situation. So, you get the initial reaction, which is, oh my goodness, what's going to happen next? And then it's being able to recognize all those feelings, emotions, and thoughts that are coursing through your body as you get that spike of adrenaline. And, your first thought is you panic a little bit. And, the only way to really overcome that, at least for me personally, what I found was one, experience helps tremendously. Having gone through a situation over and over and over again, practicing it, the visualization, all that stuff compounds. But 2, it's being able to have the recognition of that emotional feeling and understanding what that is and being able to park that right away and focus on what the task is at hand. And the task is at hand that right now in this situation, I need to prepare for stopping this breakaway. And there's nothing else that matters at this moment.
So you don't have a whole lot of time to think those things. And so what you're telling me is that when that game situation develops, those are all conscious thoughts that you can recall saying to yourself inside your head as the shooter is about to cross the blue line and get into the zone on you?
No, you fall back on, as I mentioned, experience, okay. The repetition, the visualization, the mental rehearsal that you have played this scenario out in your mind before the event actually occurs. And, you know, as a young goaltender, that's not necessarily the case. So it becomes an overwhelming situation, and the things that you would normally do to proactively make that save don't necessarily happen because you're overwhelmed by the moment. And the moment it's very easy to get overwhelmed by it, and to have something like that take over. The player makes a nice move, scores a goal, and we're looking at a 1-1 hockey game with 5 minutes left. And it feels like you may be blowing the game when you could have been the hero of the day, made that save. But that's not always how it goes.
So it's interesting how the stimulus of the shooter, the article, by the way, is, let me make sure I get this correct. The article is called Under Pressure, How Elite Athletes Respond to Stress. And it's from September 2020. So it's about 2 years old. Like I said, it's from Vernon Williams. And what you describe is exactly what this article kind of talks about and paraphrases. So let's just talk really quick about physiologically what's happened to you, Curtis. And by no means am I an expert. Clearly, I'm quoting an article, but it's important for people that are listening to figure this out and understand that it's a stress response to seeing that shooter unopposed coming and skating down. And it says when the body experiences mental or physical stress, a series of signals and relays takes place in the brain that results in a command to the adrenal glands to release the stress hormones of cortisol and adrenaline. And so you feel that. And I bet if you had a blood pressure monitor, your BP probably rose 10 to 15% or 10 to 15 points above what it already was for your performance sustaining yourself in that game. But it's interesting. The stress hormones are chemicals that cause physiological changes throughout the body. The sympathetic nervous system engages what is known, and you mentioned this, fight or flight response. Of course, most of us probably want that fight response. The flight response would be you leaving the goal and skating off the ice because you just couldn't bear to face the shot. Well, we know that that's not realistic. And most of the time we're kind of forced into those fights. We put ourselves there. But it provides the body with a burst of energy to defend itself. And so it's kind of a defense mechanism, that stress, for you to kind of figure out, like, this is a situation that I don't want to be in. I really wish that one of my defenders had gotten back and didn't let this guy get a breakaway, or there wasn't the bobble at the blue line that set it up. And then it talks about the physiological response, faster heartbeat, blood pressure, pushing the blood to the muscles, all these things. You read that and you kind of almost think this is a good thing. Well, it's not. And so this thing continues on to talk about the body's physiological response. And some athletes say it's cost them the game when they haven't been able to overcome it. And I think you mentioned with the younger player, they let that stress overcome them. We're going to talk later at the end of the podcast when we wrap it up. We're going to give folks some skills and some steps that they can take. And we're going to talk about a situation, and we're going to talk about this thing called, basically it's this understanding, they call it metacognition. All right. And that really basically means is that you can take in the stress, but you do what you were talking about, Curtis, and you overcome it. And you overcome it by things like understanding what's at stake, understanding what you need to do to not be the zero and to be the hero, and overcoming the body's physiological response to go fight or flight. And you overcome all that stress and all those things by saying to yourself, I can make this save. I can do this. And it comes from things like what we talked about last time, visualization, things that we talked about last time of preparing yourself mentally for a situation that could develop, and then not being surprised when it happens, right? And so the whole thing is interesting. And this metacognition, if you guys want to do your own research on it, It's this understanding that your body's going to physiologically respond to stressors in a way that you can't control. But what you can control is your reaction to those increases in adrenaline and those increases in cortisol. So that's really getting on top of your emotions, right? It's not acting emotionally and freaking out, but it's getting on top of it and going, you know what? I got the skills to make the save. So much going on there and so much to peel back. It's really pretty neat. And so I want to stay on the hockey thing a little bit longer, Curtis, if we can. And I want to talk about, do you have situations where you've let those things overcome you when you were maybe younger? I know you shared on Instagram some of your experiences playing for Anaheim or Calgary, excuse me. And you kind of wished that you could go back and do things different. And so take us through that. Take us through some of that of situations where you let these increases in cortisol and stress kind of take away.
Sure. I've got one situation where it kind of overwhelmed me, and it goes back to my senior year of college. I had an opportunity. I played at Colorado College. We had a great hockey club. We were in the Frozen Four playing in the semifinals against the University of Denver, who was our big time rival. And, it was all four. It used to be the WCHA team. So we're playing Denver in the semi to get to the final. And all I was doing in my mind, I'm 22 at the time, I was projecting and thinking about where I was going to be playing in the final, right? So I wasn't focusing on the moment. And I go in to play this great University of Denver hockey team that would ultimately go on to win the championship. And when you're in a hockey game and things start to snowball, you have to have the ability to be able to park things. And this was an early learning experience for me, even though it was at 22 at that point in my life. This game got out of hand. They scored, I think the final might have been like 6-1 or something, but they scored 6 power play goals. And when you're a goalie and you're trying to, the game starts getting out of hand, your number one objective is to stop the bleeding. How do we prevent this game from just going south and turning into a 6-7 goal against game? And that essentially ended my college career, but it was a great learning experience for me. And I think what happened was I didn't focus on the moment. I wasn't able to park a goal when it happened and move beyond that. And, there were a lot of things that I still had to learn in order to be able to compartmentalize those moments that occur within a hockey game and to move beyond them. And the only objective becomes, I need to make the next save. The goal is always, don't let in the first shot. We don't want to give up a goal in the last minute of a period. They're all momentum things, ways to start a game, not ideal. So that was one situation where things kind of got out of control, started getting away from me, and I was never able to regain control of the moment. On the flip side, there's, it did take me a while, as I mentioned, but this one game in particular, the Leafs and Penguins game, excuse me. And I was playing for the Leafs at the time. I had been picked up on waivers, and the Leafs were in this playoff battle. And we were coming down to the stretch. I think the Leafs might have been like 8th place or something, the last spot. We've got 2 games left, one against the Pens, one against Columbus. And Freddie Anderson, our starting goalie, goes down. I think it was in the middle of the second period or something. And I'm sitting on the bench, and my first reaction is like, no. This cannot be happening right now, right?
This isn't supposed to happen.
It's not really how we drew it up. So yeah, Freddie goes down, natural reaction. You grab your helmet, you stick, jump over the bench, and you just hop into that net. You get a little 30-second stretch, and boom, the game's on. I think I give up a goal right away, and I want to say it was the tying goal. Maybe it was 3-3 or something. We're in the second period. I'm trying to help the Leafs get into the playoffs. I don't think they'd been in for about 4 or 5 years now, so it was a big deal. And I'm just sitting there. My heart rate's going and going and going. I'm trying to settle into this game, but it is not easy. You're at home ice playing against Sidney Crosby. Penguins were a good hockey club. And I'm just trying not to screw this thing up.
Yep.
Not an easy situation to go into as a backup goalie, but that's what they call you for. And that's what you're there for. So we roll into the third period. I think Kapanen scores for the Leafs, puts them up 4-3. I watched this game a little bit the other day. I'm like, I've never actually rewatched the game. I have to see it for myself. This is one of those moments. It was a career-defining moment for me.
You bet.
I think there's 2 minutes left in the game. There's like a turnover on the wall in our zone. Phil Kessel gets the puck on like the half wall. Phil Kessel's a tremendous passer. He's also a great shooter, but he's a tremendous passer. He zips this puck right across the top of the crease. We have two defensemen that kind of commit to a play, don't really see it happening. And lo and behold, the only guy sitting on the far side of the crease is Sidney Crosby, of course.
Of course. Yeah.
So Phil zips his pass across. Crosby isn't able to get all of it, but he still gets enough of it. He shoots it into the top part of my pad, and thankfully, my career might have gone otherwise had it gone in. So Sid blasts one in my pad. I make this, looks like a great save this season for the Leafs. We end up making a few other key plays to wrap up that game. The Leafs make the playoffs. And it's one of those like moments that, as I mentioned, career defining moment. I don't think it'll ever go anywhere. That's kind of what I'm known for the most part. Beyond the cup wins with the Lightning, that save in Toronto. That's it. That's like the moment of my career. Probably a highlight in essence of the actual playing side of it. But it was one of those moments where, you know, it could have easily gotten away from me. It could have snowballed into blowing that game, going into game 82, playing against Columbus, trying to get into the playoffs, which was a tough team to play against. And
So to the fans, right, to the Leafs fans that still remember that save, they remember the ramifications of what it meant. And they saw you kind of come in and save Freddie Anderson, save the team, you know, and win the game. But to you, it's funny because your personal experience, it's galvanizing for you for a completely different reason. It's galvanizing for you because what it meant for you to tell the story of the Colorado College situation and then to compare it to the more mature professional for several years, Curtis, who overcomes all those kind of things and all that stress and goes, you know what, I just got to make the save. And so that shows the maturity and the kind of the preparation and the confidence to go, I don't care who the shooter is. I don't care who's passing it. And you just got to get there and get a pad on it.
You're focusing in on the moment, right? You know, experiencing the failure and the pain that came with going through that last college hockey game of just getting absolutely blasted. Yeah. And one of my good friends in town here was on that national championship team for DU. So I have to constantly see him and get reminded of that, which is priceless, but that's part of life. You know, I think the other thing too is
I bet he doesn't have 2 Stanley Cups.
No, thankfully not. No. You're conditioning yourself to people kind of messing up in certain situations. And what that does, in essence, I think when I was playing at Colorado College, I would point the finger at individuals and say, oh, great, so-and-so screwed up and here's a breakaway and I have to make a save. Whereas now, or what the process was in Toronto, it's like when something happened in the span of a hockey game, which happens very quickly, there's no time to point the finger. You just focus on what your job is. End of story. If you have success, great. You help somebody out. If you happen to let that goal in and don't rise to the challenge, now we just need to move on and focus on whatever the next event's going to be. You know, it was being able to kind of turn the page as quickly as possible and move beyond that moment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've got 2 almost exact stories that have to do with flying and not playing in the NHL. My pilot training check ride. The check ride is like a formal evaluation to determine whether or not you've got the fitness to continue in the program. So I say check ride, think of it like an evaluation. There's tons of pressure. It's my very first one, and all I want to do is win. All I want to do is be the best and get the best grade that I can and have a 0 downgrade excellent on my check ride. So I'm building this up in my head. I'm a brand new UPT student flying the T6. And I go into the check ride. I'm studied. I'm prepped. I'm really, really confident. And I had been doing well in the program. And I go into the check ride and we take off and we're going to do patterns first. So we're going to take off. We're going to go in the traffic pattern and we're going to fly around and we're going to practice some landings and stuff. And then we're going to go out to the airspace. We're going to do some maneuvers, all single airplane maneuvers. Then we're going to come back and do some more patterns and we're going to land. And the evaluator is sitting in the airplane in the back seat with me. And they're quiet. They're not saying diddly squat. And I'm treating that profile as if I'm solo. So they're back there as a safety observer, and they're back there if something should go really, really bad. but they're not to make any inputs during the check ride. So you see where this is going. I'm pretty stressed, and I don't have the maturity as an aviator to overcome the stress with skill, with preparation, with experiences of me knowing what an Air Force check ride is like. So we take off, we jump into the pattern. I come up into the break. So we basically fly over the runway, and we're going to re-enter the downwind leg to configure and then land, right? But when you turn from what they call initial to enter the downwind portion of the traffic pattern, you got to make sure that there isn't already somebody established in the traffic pattern. So it's a pattern that is not controlled by tower, and there's a lot of airplanes up there, and it is see and avoid. And you listen to radio calls to make sure that you've got the pacing, and there are priorities of where you can put your airplane and where you can't. But the bottom line is, I start to turn into the downwind, and there's another airplane there. If I had continued the turn, we would have potentially come really close to hitting, if not hitting each other. We're co-altitude. They're already there, so they're established in priority, and I didn't realize where he was. And so I start to enter the break. And as I do that, the IP evaluator in the back seat grabs the airplane, says my airplane, because that's how we transfer aircraft control, whams the stick to the left, and rolls us out and keeps us going back on our heading, waiting for him to pass before we can turn it into the pattern. Pretty early in the check ride, I think it was like 6-7 minutes into the sortie, and I'm sitting there going, well, that's not good. Like, when your evaluator has to take control of the airplane during your check ride, you're not doing good. But what happened? That may have been one downgrade, big one, but it may have been a downgrade, but it may not have been a bust. But what happens is now is that I'm lingering on that mistake. And instead of moving on and moving forward to the rest of the profile, I linger on that mistake, and it snowballs to one of the worst check rides my class had seen to that point. It was miserable. I screwed more stuff up in the airspace. My maneuvers weren't good. My radio calls were terrible. I came back. I didn't fly correctly into the pattern, and it wound up being just this horrible, horrible ride. I came back. The evaluator was like, what in the heck just happened? He goes through the debrief. I wind up getting my grade, and it is something like a 16 downgrade unsatisfactory or something like that. Like one of the worst check rides you could pretty much have. For anybody that's a pilot listening, a 16U, it's bad. It's bad, really bad. And that was my first of 4 check rides in the T6. And so what happens at that point, you go into a practice ride, and then you go to a reevaluation ride to determine, as a result of that check ride, whether or not you should stay in pilot training. I had a really awesome instructor. He was the squadron, I think he was the squadron commander. I can't remember. No, he was just a senior guy. But he kind of calms me down and says, hey, look, you can do this. I've seen your grade sheets. This isn't anything you need to stress about. Let's just go out and have fun. Let's just go fly. No pressure. And I went out and flew a great sortie, continued on in the program. But now comes time for my next check ride. And at this point, I've sort of settled down a little bit. I've sort of figured out how to manage my stress a little bit. And I go in, and instead of letting single mistakes compound, I make a mistake and I move on. And I go, well, I can't fix that mistake now. It's a mistake. I'll own it later. We'll deal with it later in debrief. But for right now, I'm going to continue. Cruising along.
So from the first check ride to the second one, what was the time gap? Like, how much time did you have in between those?
It was a solid, I want to say probably about a month.
Okay.
From the pre-contact check ride to the contact check ride, maybe about a month.
So you had a little bit of time to kind of process the situation, kind of acknowledge maybe where you had gone wrong and what you had missed. And then also the key thing that you pointed out is there was actually somebody there to kind of help guide you through that and not just leave you to your own devices, right? You know, right. That, like we mentioned in other episodes, that would have been something that I would have thought would have been so beneficial, especially for a goalie in a position where it seems to be, you're the last line of defense. You make a mistake and it's there's big shining lights and it's up on the scoreboard in no time.
One bad game as an NHL goalie is a blip, and you can recover from that. 5 bad games in a row, you're gonna kind of feel that one, right? Same thing in flying. I had been doing well. I have one bad check ride. The approach is pretty simple. Hey, this is uncharacteristic of your performance up to this point. Let's pick yourself back up to where you were and move on. So I go into the next check ride. I make a mistake pretty early on in the profile. The evaluator doesn't say anything. Thankfully, he doesn't have to take the airplane either. And I continue on, and I wind up getting a 1 downgrade excellent, which is a pretty rock solid check ride.
How did you find
how
did you find your stress level going into that flight? Like I would say if, as a goalie, if you'd messed up a game and you were getting ready for the next one in hockey, it's always, players talk about gripping the stick tighter the next time, right? There's no, your muscles are all tense, and that whole, just the physiological state of your body is not conducive to having success. Was there anything in particular that you were able to do? I mean, or was it just this sheer awareness of the moment and being able to kind of relax into that next flight?
It was the awareness and the pressure of knowing that it was my next check ride coming off of that really bad one. But what had happened in the month prior was a renewed emphasis on my ability to compartmentalize. And I had opportunities throughout my graded rides between the first check ride and that second one to make mistakes, but to not let them snowball. And it was one of the things that I became aware of as an aviator, and that I became aware that I was going to have to really work on it. So I had the opportunity, thankfully, to continue flying, not perfect it, but practice that skill, so that when I got into the check ride, the stress, the wet palms, all that was there. I was nervous as all get out, but I didn't let it overcome me. And it's hard to say in memory whether or not I was more stressed for that second one or for the first one. I would say the stress levels were the same because what was at stake was the same. Mm-hmm. But my response to the mistake was using a foundation of training and a foundation of mental rehearsal and practice, as opposed to the first one where it was an unexpected thing. It was a feeling that I hadn't experienced in an airplane before, and I let it snowball. So I was now kind of armed with those skills to go, look, I know what failure feels like, and I don't want to go back there again. And so how do I not go back there again? Well, I can't dwell on previous mistakes. So I just started thinking, how do I be successful? And I talked the last time about chair flying. One of the things that I had done is I chair flew my response to making a mistake and what my approach was going to be. I had never done that previously. So I started to develop this skill of how to compartmentalize. And the analogy that I use is take that mistake, put it in a tiny little box, wrap it in duct tape, put it up on the shelf for later. And then later, when I land and when I'm done and I'm debriefing, I'll take that box back down, I'll open up the tape, and we'll pull that mistake out and we'll figure out why. But I got to seal it up and get it out of my periphery, get it out of my forefront, and put it over here on a shelf. And so in my mind, I was pulling this mistake out of my brain and putting it somewhere else, and then getting focused back on what I needed to do for the rest of the sortie. I have used that for the rest of my flying career because there is no perfect sortie, and I have made mistakes on every one of them, some more than others. But it's that skill, similar to what you kind of talked about, is leveraging experience, leveraging some of that wisdom, and moving on.
Yeah, I mean, experiencing the failure is so critical to the growth that comes next. And it's almost like it's just a rite of passage. You have to go through that. You have to make mistakes. That's what the best hockey players always do. They create mistakes all the time, and then they learn from them. They add it to their Rolodex of information, and hopefully they don't make it too often again. Usually the best ones don't, but if you do continue to make mistakes, you're usually not in the league very long. Similar to if you're flying, if you continue to make mistakes, well, they're probably not going to put you in the aircraft too often.
That's true. If I make all the mistakes up front and I learn from them, then I could minimize their impact on future profiles and future games if I'm playing hockey. Interesting segue. Jocko Willink, really awesome guy, former Navy SEAL, has a podcast far more popular than this one. But one of the things that he talks about in a 2-minute video that's floating around on YouTube, oh, by the way, 9.7 million views in the last, I think, 6 years. That's pretty awesome. We're going to play it, and I'm going to play it because if you haven't heard of Jocko or know who Jocko is, you ought to check it out. He's got a really unique style and a unique way of approaching things. But we'll play that video, and then we'll meet you back on the other side. It takes about 2 minutes long, so we'll kick that off.
One of my direct subordinates, one of my guys that worked for me, he would call me up or pull me aside with some major problem, some issue that was going on. And he'd say, boss, we got this and that and the other thing. And I'd look at him and I'd say, good. And finally one day he was telling me about some issue that he was having, some problem. And he said, I already know what you're going to say. And I said, well, what am I going to say? He said, you're going to say good. He said, that's what you always say. When something is wrong and going bad, you always just look at me and say good. And I said, well, yeah. When things are going bad, there's going to be some good that's going to come from it. Didn't get the new high-speed gear we wanted? Good. Didn't get promoted? Good. More time to get better. Oh, mission got canceled? Good. We can focus on another one. Didn't get funded. Didn't get the job you wanted. Got injured. Sprained my ankle. Got tapped out? Good. Got beat? Good. You learned. Unexpected problems? Good. We have the opportunity to figure out a solution. That's it. When things are going bad, don't get all bummed out. Don't get startled. Don't get frustrated. If you can say the word good, guess what? It means you're still alive. It means you're still breathing. And if you're still breathing, well then hell, you still got some fight left in you. So get up, dust off, reload, recalibrate, re-engage, and go out on the attack.
All right. So you watched the video of Jocko, and one of the things that sticks out to me and sticks out to the stories that both Curtis told and the story that I told is you made a mistake. Good. I apply this to Curtis. Freddie Anderson goes down in the second. Well, not good for Freddie, and I hope he's okay, right? And he didn't get hurt too bad, but good, because now it's an opportunity for me to show the metal that I'm made of as the backup. It's for me to step up and show my game, not only to the fans, but to the team and to the leadership of the team. Oh, you made a mistake on the check ride. The instructor had to take the airplane. Good. Don't make that mistake again. Don't turn in front of somebody in the traffic pattern, dumbass. You're going to cause a safety of flight concern. So this whole idea of if you have the ability to say good to a mistake, that's a learning opportunity. If you can't say good and your mistake was grave enough and it cost you your life, well, then that's it. You don't know any better anyway, and then off you go. And so this idea, this warrior mindset of dust yourself off, get yourself back in the game and move on and learn from the mistake. It's an opportunity to improve. It's an opportunity to fail at something and get better. If we never failed at anything, we would never improve, and we would just be this kind of mediocre line of performance cruising through life. But the only way to really get to the top of your game is by making plenty of mistakes and not trying not to repeat them. To tell a goalie, don't ever let in the puck, well, that's impossible. It's just trying not to let in the puck in as many situations as you can control. And at the end of the day, you're faced with shooters that are just trying to score. So same thing in flying. The enemy gets a vote. Don't let the enemy win, but do your best to mitigate everything that they're doing. And so I really love that video. Curtis, what are your reactions to that?
Yeah, it's such a good mindset. I think too, from like a hockey perspective, what we find is that some of the greatest players are the ones most willing to make mistakes constantly, and where some players find they don't necessarily get the growth, it's because they're afraid to make mistakes, and they can never move beyond that because they don't want to lose what they currently have. whereas those elite players are willing to make mistakes. And it all comes down to how long the leash is that individual players each have.
Yeah.
Granted, if you have someone who's a first round pick, well, they have a much longer leash than, say, a 7th round pick or a free agent signed kid out of college or junior hockey. So, but when you give young players, a long leash to make mistakes and to kind of help coach them through those experiences, sometimes you increase the development, not only the speed of it, but the overall potential of where that player is actually going to fit in your lineup. So there always comes a time where you say, okay, enough's enough. We've seen plenty of mistakes. We're not necessarily seeing the growth that we want to see.
Right.
Maybe we just need you slot you into this 4th line role and you're not going to move beyond that. But for the majority of players, I think when they initially come into the league, how they're going to pan out, we're not entirely sure right away. So it's important and critical that you give them that runway that they can make all these mistakes. And in that process, hopefully you're seeing growth as a player, that you say, hey, maybe there's a little bit more to our expectations of this individual than what we originally thought. And I would believe it's the same in flying. You would encourage new pilots to make the mistakes early and to expedite that growth path so that we can really see what the full potential of that individual is as a pilot and
Absolutely.
Where they may be able to slot into the Air Force, for example.
Not only do we encourage it, we expect it. We know they're not going to be perfect at something their first try, but they're going to learn.
Yeah, it's. I mean, if you have any organization or company, it's almost one of those things that needs to be encouraged and fostered, and say, hey, we need you attempting different things. Go out of the box, try something different. Let's see how far we can really push this thing, because it really is about the growth aspect of it and seeing how big and how good something can become.
Right. So one of the things that we promised last time, Curtis, was to continue to go back and give people some tools and some skills that they can put in their toolbox to take away from the podcast. Yeah, I forced you to listen for the last 45 minutes. And now here's the answer, right? So if you fast forwarded it all the way to here, then you're winning and you're going to get these things. They're not ours. We're borrowing these from people that have done a lot of great work. And so, Curtis, you found this article from two folks, really cool article from a group of folks. One of them is a lady by the name of Jacqueline Brassey and a Michael Kreit. And this is called How to Demonstrate Calm and Optimism in a Crisis. It's from April of 2020. As we promised last time, we'll make sure these links get kicked over to our Instagram, so follow us there. But Curtis, why don't you take us through this as we wrap up here and give folks listening this kind of steps, if you will.
Sure. Okay. We got 6 steps. So number 1 is adapt your personal operating model. You know, things like, what are your non-negotiables in this model? For example, sufficient sleep, regular exercise, meditation practice, and healthy food. Step 2 would be set your intention. Take a few minutes at the start of the day to go through your agenda. Identify high stakes topics and set an intention for what you want to accomplish and how you want the experience to unfold. Many people do this as a visualization exercise, like a Formula One driver imagining driving the circuit before a race. This enables you to predict emotional hotspots and provides a bulwark against reactive thinking. 3 would be regulate your reactions. While in a stressful situation during the day, observe your emotions so you can recognize the stress response, taking a pause to assess the situation and engage your rational mind before choosing how to respond. 4, practice reflection. Reflection is a way to process what happened during the day and to create space to listen to your inner world, mind, and body. 5, reframe your perspective. When we're tired from stress, we tend to see negative messages and threats more readily than opportunities and positive messages. Keeping a balance and staying realistic is not easy. Knowing this is step 1. Handling these situations effectively is step 2. When facing a difficult situation, try to redirect away from the negative explanation and toward an exploration of other possibilities that could be true. 6, manage your energy. One of the most difficult things to do in times of crisis is to balance work needs with your own physical well-being. Apart from recovery time, which may be different for everyone, micro practices that are in support of healthy recovery can include meditation, breathing exercises, cardio sports activities, and even power naps.
Awesome. So the way I look at those 6 steps and what's mentioned in this article, when you take a look at it, is the commercial pilot, Captain Chelsea Sullenberger, former Air Force pilot flying for U.S. Airways, I believe was his company at the time. And in 2009, he has a bird strike and cuts both engines right after takeoff. And I think a novice pilot or a less experienced pilot would be faced with that reaction and would want somebody to help them recover that airplane. And so as a pilot, we have these experiences and things like that. And rather than rely on the tower controllers that were telling him to turn back to the runway he just took off on, he overcame the cortisol and the adrenaline dump. He overcame all the stress and anxiety associated with knowing that he was probably just a few moments away from not only his death, but the death of that entire airplane, of all the people on that airplane. And he stayed calm. It says by practicing it says the balancing of emotions with a rational and deliberate thought process is something scientists call metacognition. We mentioned that at the start. And this is a perfect case study in metacognition. By practicing internal awareness on 2 levels, having the experience and observing it at the same time, you can catch early signals of distress, doubt, or fear without acting out a stress response. It's especially critical in times of crisis. While we can never be purely objective, we can try to reach this state as much as possible. Without objective awareness, signals of distress trigger survival behaviors, fight or flight. We talked about that. And we lose the ability to do a couple of really critical things: to pause, reflect, and make a good decision. For a leader during crisis, this survival state can present a gigantic risk. And in the case of Captain Sullenberger, it would have been a fatal one. But through metacognition and through taking these 6 steps that we just sort of highlighted, you can sort of get yourself to a place where you don't allow the body's physiological response to take over, and you can think your way over those stressors and get yourself into the place where we call it metacognition, of so much self-awareness that you still pause, reflect, and decide. All right. And so those 6 steps, thanks for walking us through those, Curtis. 2 of them stick out at me. And my reaction to reading or to hearing step 1 and step 6 is I think of balance in my life, right? When stress happens in our lives, we have this tendency to want to just get after things. And one of the analogies that the article uses was leaders, political leaders, and this is, I'm not taking a political stance here, but political leaders used the COVID pandemic and took the COVID pandemic, and their response to that was one of not eating, not taking care of, balancing other things in their lives. Many leaders they no longer did their routine, their workout. They were trying to get after responding to the problem, responding to the pandemic. And when you do that, at some point, the bottom is going to drop out. And so that whole idea of adapt your personal operating model is those are non-negotiables. Getting enough sleep should be a non-negotiable when it comes to human performance. Eating properly and exercise, diet, all those things. I'm not going to preach to you if you're listening, but those should be non-negotiables if you're expecting the maximum amount of performance on what you can produce. When you compromise those and you lose the balance, you're no longer adapting your personal model and you're giving into the stress. So I see that as my kind of analysis of number 1. And then number 6 is managing your energy. It talks about breathing exercises, cardio, sports activities. Your body will run you amok if you let it, especially when we start talking about dumping adrenaline and cortisol in through a response. So if you're in a stressful environment or a stressful situation and you don't take care of those other things, well, you're not going to last very long in that situation. And your people won't either if you're trying to lead them through that sort of situation. So 1 and 6 to me are balanced big time. I don't know, Curtis, any of those speak to you?
Yeah, the 2 that really jump out to me are regulating your reactions. anytime that something does occur, what is your initial response to it? Not only mentally, but physically. How do you appear and how do you react to that situation? So that was a big one for me to learn, especially being a goalie. I mean, all eyes are on you. So you need to give the perspective that, hey, I've got everything under control. I've been here. I've done this. I'm going to handle this situation accordingly. And, the fifth one, reframe your perspective. Anytime something happens, like Jocko was saying, take that situation, reframe it in a positive light. Hey, let's just move on. Let's be like the water going downstream, right? It hits a rock and it goes around it, over it, wherever it needs to go. But the bottom line is it's going past it. And being able to reframe whatever has occurred to you, I think is so critical to growth and continuing on whatever path that you may be on.
Perfect. Well, I have no additions other than that, but let's take it back to what this podcast is called, The Walls Within. How do we get around, through, under, over the walls that we build up in our own heads? And what can we do in certain situations to overcome that and improve and become better at what we're trying to do, and really take those skills and apply them to our own lives, but also the lives of others that are around us. And hopefully this was useful. Curtis, over to you for any parting shots.
No, that's great. I think this was a powerful episode where we got to talk about some really important stuff that really hits home for not only myself, but you as well in the flying world. So thanks everybody for tuning in.